Welcome to part 5 of our series on yoga, mindfulness, and body-based interventions. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive mindfulness. We're going to start today with our exercise on loving kindness meditation. So as you're ready, take a moment to get grounded in your body. You might choose to do this sitting or lying down. If you're sitting, maybe take that nice tall spine and place your feet on the floor. And then take a few moments in whatever position you're in to notice how you're feeling in this moment. And as you're ready, begin to bring a loved person to your mind. This could be a family member, a friend, or even a pet. Someone that you feel happy being in the presence of. And notice how this being wishes to be happy and free from suffering, just like you and every other being in the world. Take a moment to be with that person or being, and then send a few well wishes out to them. So you might silently repeat to yourself, sending this message to them: may you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. And then as you're ready, join yourself together with that other person or being. Notice being in their presence, sharing that space together. And then join yourself in that circle of well-wishing and repeat the words silently to yourself. May we be happy. May we be peaceful. May we be healthy. And may we live with ease. As you're ready, begin to separate yourself from that other person or being, and notice just being present with yourself. And then notice what it feels like to send these well wishes to yourself, as opposed to another person. You might even place a hand or both hands on your heart to really let this message sink in for yourself. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be healthy. And may I live with ease. Notice what it feels like to send those messages to yourself. And let that sink into your body for a few moments. Take another breath or two. And when you feel ready, begin to come back to the space around you and to the presentation in front of you. You might notice how it was quite different to send those messages to yourself than to other people. So we're going to talk a little bit later about self-compassion and how it's so easy to give other people compassion, but not so easy for ourselves. But for today, as we talk about trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive mindfulness, we'll start with the definition. So there's many great definitions of mindfulness out there. But my favorite one comes from a gentleman named Jon Kabat-Zinn. And we'll also talk about him a little bit later. So this one definition says that mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and without judgment. Those 4 pieces show the definition of what mindfulness is really all about. There's 3 main components within that definition and within that concept of mindfulness. The first one is intention. So we are very intentionally choosing to cultivate our mindfulness. We're bringing attention in the present moment to the sensations, the thoughts, whatever is happening in that present moment. And we're also working on our attitude. And for some people, this is the hard part. We want to be very open to whatever it is that's happening. So we're going to be kind to ourselves as well as to other people. We're going to be very curious about what's happening in each and every moment. And especially, we're going to take out that judgment. So instead of saying this is good or bad, we're just going to notice what's there and be okay with that. Let it be present. There are many, many core concepts within mindfulness. A couple of them we've talked about already in the previous few slides. So we have that focus on attention. We're doing this very intentionally. We're looking at that present moment awareness, what's happening right now, and we're doing it without judgment. There's some other pieces to this that can also be very interesting as well as very difficult. So non-striving, we're not working towards a specific goal. So sometimes we think if we're going to work with mindfulness or meditation or yoga or something else, we need to make sure that we're striving for some specific goal. But in mindfulness, we're trying to let go of that, and we're just letting things be. Sometimes it takes a lot of patience with ourselves as well as with other people to let whatever's present be present, to not be working to move forward, and to not be judging what's happening. One really nice concept in mindfulness is called beginner's mind. So in this concept, you're doing everything as if you've never done it before. This is the very first time you've experienced this thing. So maybe the first time you go ice skating, you're really paying attention to your balance, to where your feet are, to how slippery the ice is. You're doing it for the very first time, so you're really, really focusing on whatever's happening in this moment. But if you've done this 100 times or 1,000 times, it starts to become something you do without thinking about it. So we're going to try to take away that routine and do it as if we've never done it before. And we can do this with small exercises as well. It can be something as simple as washing the dishes. We've all done that many, many times. So instead of rushing through the task, notice what it feels like to have your hands in the warm, soapy water. Notice what it's like to have everything be clean. And do that as if you've never done it before. Another concept is letting things be. We're making space, making room for all of the thoughts, feelings, sensations, whatever's present. And that does mean sometimes we're even creating space for things that are a little bit difficult. We'll talk a little bit about how we don't necessarily need to stay with all of those difficult things, but we are creating space so that some of that can come up and be present. Another useful concept is over-identification. So what we tend to do is we tend to think that we are our thoughts and feelings. So we tend to have a thought and then think that that is the exact truth of our entire life. We're over-identifying with that thought or that feeling. So maybe you're having a thought or a feeling that you're not a good person. That is simply a thought or a feeling. That does not mean it's the truth. So we're identifying things as that's a thought. I'm thinking or I am feeling that I am not a good person in this moment. That is just a thought. It's just a feeling. And then we can let that go a little bit. We're also creating space for mindful reactions and actions. So instead of automatically doing something, automatically reacting the same way you always have, we're creating a little bit of extra space and time so that you can think about and decide what you would like to do. How would you like to react to that situation, that thing that person just said, whatever it is that's happening in that moment? And then you can choose how you want to act, what you want your reaction to be, instead of doing it without thinking. Compassion and self-compassion are also very important when we talk about mindfulness. So we want to make sure that we have compassion for other people, and that's usually pretty easy for people. So if you had a friend who's having a bad day or felt like they made a mistake, you would comfort them, you would be kind to them, you would speak words that are very soft and gentle. But often when it comes to ourselves, we don't do the same thing. When we have situations where we feel like we made a mistake or didn't do our best, we're often very harsh with ourselves, and we often speak to ourselves in ways that we would never speak to our family and friends. So what we want to work on is this idea of self-compassion, offering ourselves that same loving kindness, that same compassion that you would to any other person around you. And those loving kindness practices and meditations is one way to practice doing that, because it's not something that is very natural for people. So sometimes we need to practice having that self-compassion, having that loving kindness for ourselves when we're not in a difficult situation, so that when we do have something that's challenging come up, we have a little bit of practice giving ourselves that same love and kindness. So there's a couple of misconceptions that often come up when we're looking at mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness is one form of practice that comes within a much larger family of meditation techniques. And I have heard this a little bit the other way around, that we have meditation as part of mindfulness or mindfulness as a part of meditation. This is the version we're going with for today. So this is distinct from some forms of meditation in that we're trying to broaden our focus. We're trying to be aware of more things that are going on instead of narrowing our focus. So in a lot of meditative practices, we're looking to concentrate and we're looking to narrow our focus to one specific thing. So maybe we're narrowing our focus to just our breath or just that candle flame that's in front of us. Maybe we're trying to withdraw our senses completely. In mindfulness, we're going to look at expanding and being more aware of everything going on around us. So our mindfulness interventions will often begin with those different concentrative attention practices. Maybe being attentive and aware of different parts of our body or our breath. We're looking to strengthen our attentional control, paying attention to what's happening in that moment in one specific area. Over time, then, we open this up to something a little bit wider. We have more attention to different thoughts, sensations, and emotions all happening at the same time. So we're trying to, over time, maybe start small with one thing we're paying attention to for our mindfulness practice, but then widen that so that as we go through day-to-day life, we can be aware of all of the things going on around us. And again, following that definition, we're doing it with intent, we're doing it on purpose, we're staying in the present moment, and we're doing this without judgment. So you might ask, what are the benefits of mindfulness? And I also included meditation here because the benefits are very, very similar. How are these practices helpful for us? There's actually been a ton of research done, and it shows how much these practices can actually change both our physical and our mental health. A couple of the things that come up very often when looking at physical health is that it helps to decrease our blood pressure and to lower our heart rate. So those two big stress responses, we're bringing it down. Because of that, we're also improving our sleep and improving our digestion. So if you remember when we talked about the parasympathetic system and the rest and digest, this is what's allowing us to get more into the state. Our mindfulness practices are bringing us to the parasympathetic, the rest and digest part of our system. There's been studies that show this helps a lot with different mental health challenges. It can decrease depression as well as lower anxiety. And then if we're looking at trauma symptoms, we can actually reverse the sympathetic fight or flight response. So what's happening is as we're mindful, that amygdala, that fear center of our brain is actually shrinking a little bit. What that does is that gives the gray matter in our brain, the frontal part, all the other stuff that focuses on thinking, more space to grow and get stronger. And when that happens, it increases our emotional tolerance and our flexibility. And that also is going to help improve our memory over the long run because we have more strength up here in that part of our brain. So meditation and mindfulness practices actually changes the structures of the brain, which I think is pretty cool. So I have this slide kind of set up into two different sides. On the left side, we're going to see our formal therapies. And these are the things that are going to be done by people that have that master's degree in counseling, social work, or something like this. Currently, we have 4 recognized therapeutic models that have a lot of mindfulness practices incorporated into it. The first one was formed in the 1970s by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He was the founder of a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And what he did was he started to integrate some of the principles from Buddhist mindfulness into science and medicine. And with that integration, he formed a program that really balanced out a lot of different exercises that are very simple to do into an 8-week program to help people mindfully work on their stress. If you ever have a chance, I highly recommend this program. It's wonderful for anyone, whether it's you, your clients. It can be a great program. Also in the 70s, we had Marsha Linehan developing dialectical behavioral therapy. And this combined certain Western and Eastern influences at the beginning specifically to work with people with certain personality disorders. So this is still primarily used for personality disorder issues, but this can actually be a program that has a lot of components that's helpful for many people because it rotates through ideas such as emotional regulation, psychoeducation, and mindfulness, and it will continue to go back through these modules for a longer period of time, usually about 6 months, so that we continue to have practice with our mindfulness activities. In the 1980s, a program called Acceptance and Commitment Therapy was developed. And this also brings in those mindfulness ideas and very strongly puts it together with ideas around acceptance and commitment. So acceptance is accepting what's happening in this present moment and knowing that we can't always change those situations. And then we make a commitment to ourselves that we're going to work with what we can mindfully within what we're accepting for the present moment. And then our last mindfully based therapeutic technique is a little bit newer. In the beginning of the 21st century, a couple of folks got together and built on Jon Kabat-Zinn's work. They developed mindful-based cognitive therapy. So in this, we're pulling in some of those ideas from cognitive behavioral therapy and combining it with our mindfulness practice. So those were the things that are really for the trained mental health professionals. If you look over on the right side of the slide, we have those activities that all of us can lead, wonderful activities for yoga teachers or anyone in the healing professions. So mindful self-compassion is again that idea that we're offering ourselves that same level of compassion that we would offer to other people. Mindful breathing is again one of our best techniques because again, breathing is that only part of our system that is both voluntary and involuntary. So we can control it and use it to change our body system in the moment, usually by taking those slow, deep exhales. We have eye rest and yoga nidra. So yoga nidra is the yoga of sleep. And this is usually done lying down in a very stable, comfortable position, lots of props underneath you. And then you're led through a guided meditation that looks at different parts of your body, different sensations, your breath, your intention, lots of different ideas. iRest is a segment of this. So iRest was specifically developed for people who've had trauma through the military. So iRest does require a little bit of additional training. Doesn't have to be a full master's degree. It's just a separate training. But Yoga Nidra can be led by anyone. So if you're a yoga teacher and you'd like to add some of this into your practice, there's some wonderful books and scripts that you can use for that. We have lots of versions of meditation that we can add into our mindfulness practice. Some people will enjoy that silent meditation. You can do many, many different kinds of guided meditations for almost any issue that's going on. Loving kindness is again one of these meditation practices, as well as that body scan that we practiced on an earlier section. A couple other things that you can do is mindful eating. So instead of rushing through your meal, again, being checked out and just eating quickly, you can sit down and have that be the only thing that you're doing. So slowly notice each bite that you're taking. Chew slowly, enjoy your food, and notice how that might feel different than your normal way of eating your meal. We can do the same thing with walking. Instead of rushing to our next activity, we could make a choice to mindfully, slowly walk to our next place and notice the position of our feet. Notice the air on our skin as we're walking. Notice what's going on around us. But again, being very attentive, being very intentional to be aware of what's happening right now. You can do this with any other form of movement. So we've talked a little bit about movement exercises such as Tai Chi and yoga. Those things can be done without mindfulness or very mindfully paying attention to how each of these movements feel in our body. And then also the progressive muscle relaxation is another great technique that we've talked about a little bit and practiced a little bit already. So getting a little bit more into some of these theories when we're looking at how this relates to working with mental health. So coming out of mindfulness-based stress reduction are the stages of acceptance. And in this we know that there are difficult emotions. Everyone has emotions that are challenging, that are painful, that cause anger, fear, grief, things like this. What we notice is that when we turn towards these emotions, sometimes the pain gets a little bit more. It temporarily increases. And sometimes meditators wonder how much should they let that be part of their practice? And really the answer is not very much. So we don't want to get into a place where we dive into the really deep emotional pain for these practices. What we want to do instead is just touch it. Just notice the beginning of it or a little bit of it. And then after you've had a little bit of time to be aware that that emotion is there, you can shift out of it and move back towards some grounding exercises or something that brings some comfort, that self-compassion. When we grow our capacity for self-compassion, that will also give us more of an ability to work with that emotional discomfort. So over time, we can go more and more into that, but we don't need to feel like we have to do it all at once. We can do it a little bit at a time. Another way of looking at this is stages of acceptance. So when we start, we're going to try to explore very gently and just be curious and say, what is this going on? What is this feeling? What is this sensation? And just notice it for a few moments with curiosity, with that openness. Once we have that in place and we feel like we can safely do it, we can tolerate a little bit more. So over time, we're building up that capacity again to be safe and tolerate a little bit more of those challenging emotions. And then over time, we can move more and more towards allowing those emotions, allowing those sensations to come and go with an open awareness. Being able to say, yes, I notice this pain. Yes, I notice the sadness. That's okay. When I'm ready, I can move out of that. Part of this is befriending all of these experiences. So we want to see that there's value in all of our emotions. That it's not only the happy and pleasant and good things that are important for our lives, but we need to have the full range of our human experience, including those difficult things, to really embrace the complexity and the fullness of our lives. As we move through each of these stages, we gradually have a little bit more of a release to that resistance of difficult emotions. So instead of pushing things away right away, we get to the point where it's okay to have a little bit of that in your life so that you can fully appreciate the range of emotions and the range of your experience. One idea that comes out of this that is really helpful is called titration. And this is especially important when we're looking at trauma. So we're very gently starting to approach that emotional material that's a little bit difficult. And what we're doing is we're just touching it a little bit. We're noticing it, we're recognizing its presence, and then we're going back to a safer space. We're going back to something grounding, something that feels better for that individual. So we're going towards that emotional material for a little bit, and then we're backing away. And we're going to do this over and over again over time so that we can begin to modulate or titrate our approach to trauma so that it doesn't become overwhelming. We want to let there be enough space that we can develop these new skills and self-compassion for ourselves so that we can touch that trauma material and then go back to that safe place. So again, after trauma, the first thing that we're going to look at is establishing safety and stability and increasing that self-compassion. So before we get to that difficult thing, we have to have that calm space. We're doing this with an approach that we can be with, but not overwhelmed by our trauma. So we've talked a little bit about these two phrases, trauma sensitive and trauma informed. So remember, trauma informed, that's what anyone can do. You just need to have that awareness that people have perhaps experienced trauma in their lives. And whatever activity you're conducting, move forward with the awareness and the sensitivity that they may have that in their past. Trauma sensitive is really working again for specific issues related to mental health. So if we're doing trauma sensitive mindfulness, we are working with people that we know have had some kind of mental health challenge, and we're really focusing on that issue in our sessions. One of the ways that we can do this is have our mindfulness enhance that present moment awareness, that self-compassion, and again, that ability to self-regulate. That titration is a huge part of that. Over time, we can use mindfulness to increase people's capacity to integrate trauma and again, regain that sense of agency. So we talked in an earlier section that when people have a trauma, control is taken away from them. We want to do mindfulness in a way that we're giving people control back. We're helping them regain that control wherever it was lost. When we're doing mindfulness exercises, sometimes we're inviting people who've experienced trauma unintentionally to come into contact with that stimuli, to have some of those thoughts, images, memories, sensations come up. And sometimes this is simply because in most people's lives, they're very busy pushing that away. They're being very busy, they're distracting themselves with other activities, maybe they're dissociating. But when we create this mindfulness space, we're slowing things down, and sometimes that's when there's finally enough space for that trauma memory to come up. And remember, our trauma memories are stored differently in our brain. So it can be very difficult for people to distinguish between a trauma that happened 10 years ago and what's happening in this moment. So we're going to be very careful, and we're going to show you a few examples of how to do this. But we're going to be very careful to not re-traumatize people by allowing those trauma symptoms to come back and overwhelm the person. One way to work with this is to remember the 4 R's. We're going to realize the impact of trauma and how that might have changed a person's biological systems as well as their nervous system. We're going to recognize symptoms, so we're going to be looking out for those little cues that tell us that they might be having a little bit more of a trauma response right now, so that we can then respond to them skillfully. We can do a different technique, we can change things, we can do lots of different techniques to make this be a situation where we can prevent that re-traumatization. So we're going to use all of our skills and techniques to keep this from being an overwhelming situation for people. One of those best things, again, is to come back to that present moment. So remember that trauma memory, it feels like it's happening right now. So what we want to do is we want to get people to be really, really good at focusing on the present moment and noticing physical sensations, what's around you, how are you experiencing this moment. And that really strong focus on the present is going to be essential for helping people become unstuck from the past. What we're going to do with this is called dual awareness. So we're going to help people get really, really good at experiencing the present moment. And then we're going to bring in just a little bit of that past trauma or that past anxiety, just that touch of it. But we're going to help people stay grounded in the present so that they can feel and know that that is something that happened in the past. That trauma memory is not happening now, and they can view it from that separate position. We have that dual awareness that we're remembering a past event, we're observing the self, and we're being in the present moment. We're also increasing our capacity to allow ourselves to stay in the present moment when it's a little bit uncomfortable. So sometimes this might be a trauma reminder, but it's not going to be something that's too overwhelming. We're getting more and more comfortable with things being temporarily uncomfortable. You might remember we also practice this a little bit in our yoga sessions, that we might practice being in an uncomfortable physical position, but knowing that we have the choice to come out at any point in time, and that is just for a little while. So I said that we're going to look at how we can change our mindfulness practices in ways that can be helpful for people that might have some of this trauma or mental health challenge in their history. One very simple thing to do is have a shorter practice. Instead of having a half-hour meditation to start with, that might be a lot for some people. Maybe we just do 5 minutes. Maybe we just do 3 minutes. And once that feels okay, we can start to make the time be a little bit longer. But we want to start with something that's manageable and safe for people to do. Again, we're going to offer as many choices as we can. We want to put the power back in the hands of people who have survived the different situations. So you've heard me say during different meditations that you can choose the position that your body's in. You can lie down or stand up. You may have heard me say you can gaze down towards the floor or you can close your eyes. So we're giving little choices to help people have a little bit more of that agency again. Another thing that you can do is that keeping the eyes open. So that's often an option that I give, because when you have your eyes open, it's a little bit easier to stay in the present moment by noticing the environment that you're in. So that can help people to stay in the present moment a little bit more. You might incorporate movement. That movement can be a cue that the body is actually in that present moment. So it might be something as simple as, if you're breathing, you can gently bring your hands up on your inhale and down on your exhale. And that can be something right in front of you for a smaller movement. If it's better for someone, you can do a bigger movement. Have them inhale, lift their arms up, and exhale, bring their arms down. We can look at modifying the position that people are in. So sometimes people might not be comfortable in a seated position for a meditation. But if we allow them to stand up, they can feel a little bit more grounded. Or you might have the option of lying down versus sitting up. All great choices. Again, giving people choices of how they would like to use their body. Again, using our breath can be a great way to reground. So this is a good thing to do at the beginning and end of sessions, or at any point in time where you see people might be starting to get triggered just a little bit. Take a few slow, long exhales. If people are going into that hypoarousal that we talked about a couple of sessions ago, you might take a couple of deep inhales. Both excellent choices, but using your breath, it's a great tool that we have, so let's use it. That self-soothing or that self-compassionate touch can be nice. For many people, putting a hand on their heart can simply bring that focus to a little bit of a compassionate state for themselves. Sometimes, instead of sitting and trying to be in stillness, we give people something specific to focus on. So we might focus on an external object. A candle flame is a very popular one. We might use the 5 senses. So we might say, what are 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and so on. But using all 5 senses to be grounded in what's happening in this moment. Great exercise to do. We can allow our focus to be on different sensations. That could be your feet if you're walking. It could be listening to what's around you. One thing that I've used with a couple people is if they get triggered easily and need some movement, maybe they cross their arms and they simply tap their finger. And they notice the sensation of their finger tapping against the arm. So this is something that doesn't look strange to anyone. You could do this standing in the line at the grocery store. No one will think twice about it. But that feeling of tapping your arm can help bring that awareness back into your body. And of course, again, as we talked about in our yoga session, we're creating safe spaces. Whatever exercise we're doing, we want to have that safe space for people. So we're going to be paying a lot of attention to things like the lighting, making sure things are private, that people have awareness of where the exits are. We want things to be predictable so that people feel like they can relax a little bit knowing what's going to happen. We might be aware of scents. So strong smells can often be triggering. We might take that away as much as possible. We might be aware of having gender-neutral bathrooms for people. All of the things that we can do to create a safe space is going to be useful to help people to get into a more mindful state. So as much as we can get people out of that very alert state of scanning around for that next danger or threat and let people get, again, into their parasympathetic state, is going to help them with their mindfulness and meditation practices. So that's the end of our 5-part series on yoga, mindfulness, and body-based interventions. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey. I hope that you have learned something, and I hope that if you have any questions, you find a way to reach out to me. Thank you very much.